Okay, so MTR Nord is watching, and things are working apparently. That's nice. So I guess I should go over what I actually want to work on. Let me find the issue number 579. It's somewhere. Nope. So yeah, I guess the easier way is actually to show this in the docs that we currently have. We have a lot of enums in here in the events module, what used to be its own crate and recently got merged, but it's all presented as one big Ruma crate anyways. So yeah, and for room events specifically, that is the events that are persisted on home servers. We have a bunch of events, which is the message-like event for things like text messages, voice messages, a few things like room keys that are distributed to other users in the same encrypted room also count as message-like. So those are in one enum. Then there's the overall room event enum and the state event enum. So basically within for all of the persisted room scoped events that a home server handles, there's two types: the message-like ones that are often just called message events in the spec, but we've chosen a little more verbose name, so it's clear that it's not text messages only. There's these two types, message-like and state events, and you can see here, oh, that's actually one enum that I just opened the docs page for, that's only for redacted events, which is yeah, ones where the actual content was stripped through a redaction event, which is also a variant of or a type of message-like event. You can see here. And yeah, we also have these because there's redacted and non-redacted variations of all of the room events. I think we currently somewhere have these enums that are called possibly redacted, and I don't like them very much. They are not actually used within the rest of the code base. Instead, I think it's any room event or any sync room event, which is basically the same thing, except that the events in there don't have a room ID field. I think those have 4 variants, and on this level distinguish between redacted and non-redacted. But that's really kind of annoying to deal with, because the right thing to do would really be to check for the type of event that you have first, and then handle the possibility of the event being redacted, rather than first having to match on this and then on the type. So that is the main change that I want to implement, and then a bunch of these enums can actually go away. The possibly redacted ones can go away entirely, and some of the others are gonna look a little bit different. Did I? Yeah, no, I didn't write up an actual plan for today, but I think it should still be doable. And feel free to ask questions in the Twitch chat or over on Matrix, although on Matrix it might be better. Oh, I just saw Inuwa's message on the Ruma live streams chat, so I get notifications for those as well. That's good, so I should see either messages in the live stream Matrix channel or the Twitch chat. And if I actually start doing this again on a more regular basis, I'm probably gonna set up some sort of widget to show the matrix room, the messages from that matrix room on stream. But yeah, for now I just did the most basic thing to get something to work at all. Okay. So most of this work is going to be in Ruma macros, because all of these enums actually generated from one big macro invocation that I guess I should just pull up. Yeah, this is it. It's one big macro invocation that not only generates the enums that can hold different types of events, but also generates event type enums, one for everything, that I actually recently deprecated because it's also not really that useful. There doesn't make a lot of sense to abstract over either events in a room scope or entirely different ones like account data and stuff like that. But there is also room event type, state event type, and message like event type, and plus these others. Those actually make sense, and they're all generated by the same macro invocation, so we don't have to repeat ourselves too much. Yeah, so this is the proc macro entry point. Here's where the actual event enums plus also enums over different event content types that you use to send these events to the server before like all of the non-content fields like the server timestamp and the event ID and such are added. This is all generated by the first half here, and the second half is for the event type enums, which aren't really interesting for what I plan to do now. So I'm gonna jump in here to the event enum module inside Ruma macros/events. Also, hi Andy. Nice to see you watching as well. Andy is a colleague now that I work at Element, who also streams every Monday. Works on a Matrix bot, or well, in the last week it's always been Matrix SDK work for that bot, actually, to allow it to use Redis as a backend for the crypto store, the Matrix SDK's crypto store. Anyway, yeah. So I think I previously looked at this. There's a separate function for just possibly redact, for these possibly redacted enums that I was saying I don't see really any use case for, and that might actually be the first thing to do, to just rip this out entirely. And this should be a working change in itself, because yeah, these types aren't used anywhere right now. You could in theory have used these in downstream code to to collect different types of events into them in theory, but I'm pretty sure nobody was actually doing that. Yeah, Rust Analyzer doesn't complain, and I'm gonna run some parts of the CI, but I really don't expect this to cause any issues. I'm gonna commit it right away. Oh, I should get rid of those untracked files though. Yeah, then we have in the macro code we have these two enums, event kind, which basically describes what set of fields outside of the content exist on an event and where it will be used. So, for example, most of these events are returned from the home server as part of a sync events get something / sync response, and they each have their own bit of that JSON response, basically where they go. So, for example, presence would be somewhere. Yeah, presence is actually directly a member of the response, and then in there's an object under that field name which has just an events property itself with a list of those events. And also the presence event looks like this, where it's just the content plus the sender of the presence event, and all of the events also have a kind of hidden in the Rust bindings type field. So for presence it's always m.presence. It's kind of a little bit redundant with the fact that it is under the presence key. But for room events, because there it would actually make somewhat of a difference, always redundantly sending the room ID. There's actually two different sets of types. One's for room scoped events that have a room ID field, which are the message like event with the room ID field here, and the state event field with its room ID, and then there's these sync variations which don't have that. And these are actually the most interesting ones for what I want to do today, message like and state events, because they are the ones that can be redacted, where this whole enum hierarchy is really kind of annoying, with having to check for redaction before checking for the type of the event. If you use some sort of API where you get a list of events. If you use the Matrix Rust SDK's event handler, then it's a little bit of a different thing, and I'm not 100% sure yet how these changes are going to affect that. It might make sense to still allow people to only react to non-redacted events of a specific type, but I definitely want to enable it to be able to define an event handler that reacts to an event of a certain type regardless of whether it's redacted or not, which is especially important for state events, because they still affect the room state regardless of whether they are redacted or not. And if you were to implement a full client using the Rust SDK now, that would actually be a really easy mistake to make, to only consider non-redacted, say room topic updates or something like that. But really you also need to check for redacted ones, which would mean that the room topic's actually unset, so set blank again rather than staying at the value it previously had. So yeah, these tests all passed. That's good. So yeah, and in addition to the event kind and the macro code, we have what's just locally alias as v here, the event kind variation, which is represents what I mentioned, that there's sometimes variations of these kinds. The sync variations for message-like and state events, for state events, and I think it might be both that also have a stripped and initial variation for. I think one of them is for rooms that you're invited into, where you don't actually get the full event. Some of the fields are stripped, although it might be for. Yeah, I think this one is for state events only. It's all a little bit complicated, and then here's the redacted ones as well. But I think potentially these are going to go away from this part of the macro code, because really what I would like to have is within each of these event modules. So for example, m.sticker, which should be a message-like event, that these types, sticker event and sync sticker event, are actually enums over whether it's over the full thing or the redacted thing. And so I think those two type aliases should also just go away. And then the event content stays the same, because there we actually need two structs. In most cases, the redacted content struct is just an empty struct that serializes to an empty JSON object, because there's only a few select event types that still hold data when they are redacted. For example, there is room power levels, and there you can see that actually a lot of stuff is still present when you redact this event, because it's crucial for the room that you know who is allowed to do what, and that's what the power levels are there for. So yeah, a few things are stripped. I don't actually know what. It looks like invite is redacted. I wonder whether that is actually intended. It might be a bug. Anyway, can look into that separately. And yeah, the first change was rather simple, and now I'm already not entirely sure whether to now remove this or look into restructuring the enums first. But I think I'm gonna go for making these not necessary by changing what we generate for each event type, which is a different macro. So if I go to that power levels module, here what we're doing is using the event content derive macro to generate all of these type aliases. By the way, though, what these look like is, yeah, they instantiate a certain generic event type with that event content type. So state event is generic over the content type, and it's all a little bit more complicated than just having this serialized to that content field in the JSON, because this C also determines what the type of this event is and what's going to get serialized as the type field. But I think that's luckily not something I have to go into in detail right now, or touch as part of this work. Yeah, so if I go there and jump into the module that implements this macro, we're now a few just one file next to the one that I opened before. I'm gonna collapse a few things here so you can get somewhat of an overview of what happens here. Really, there's a few separate things that are getting generated when we use the event content derive. It generates a redacted event content struct. This one, that's also not defined in the code directly, rather the non-redacted type has these skip reduction attributes, and for every field that has this attribute, we copy that field over into the redacted content struct that we generate. And then there is this event content trait. So if I go to one of these event types again, you can see there's a generic bound on the C using this event content trait, and what this trait does is pretty much just let you extract out the event type from the content. And so we generate that. Then we generate another trait that I don't think is super important here, trait implementation. And then there's the type aliases. And I'm gonna jump to that now. Okay, so I see we are using the redacted event kind variation here as well. Yeah, so we go over all of these 6 variations, and then for some of them that are applicable in this situation, we generate the type alias. And so I guess we could just remove this, but I'm pretty sure this is going to cause some errors. If you can hear something in the background, that's just my cat. Okay, yeah, there's a bunch of errors all coming from the event enum macro. So this will have to be Andy says hi to the cat. Maybe, just maybe, at some point I'll actually have a camera stream on in here. Okay. Yeah, maybe it actually makes sense to remove these variations now, and then first try to get all of the macro code working again before worrying about about the code that gets written by the macro. Yeah, so now all of the errors are in the macro code, and the other ones are gone because it can't even compile that other code yet without being able to first build the macro. There's really a lot of stuff that interacts with these redacted ones, and then I could easily see this comment removing more code than it adds in the end. Okay. Ah, interesting. I removed I made this pattern invalid. Yeah, that can just go. I have no idea how much sense the code still makes with me removing all of these things, but I think it makes sense to start like this, and then later it should be obvious from all of the surrounding code, in particular Ruma client API should complain if we remove too much stuff that was actually being used somewhere. Okay, so this is an interesting one. We have this redact trait, and currently the way it works is when we have something like any state event, then it implements redact, and with the associated type redacted being any redacted state event, and then you have this function for transforming one enum into the other. I don't know how much sense this still makes. I guess it could still make sense if any state event is going to represent both redacted and non-redacted events. It should actually be fine to still have this implementation and just have the redacted type be that same type. Yeah. So redacted enum is just going to be like so, the same type, and the rest actually looks pretty reasonable under the change that the way I'm thinking of it. Isaiah asks whether redacting a redacted state event would just be a no-op. Yes, I'm not sure whether the trait is actually implemented for the types where we already know them to be redacted right now, but that's the idea. Yeah, no, it doesn't seem to be implemented, but the enums that we have right now that can represent either, like this one, which can be message-like, or could also already be redacted. Yeah, they do implement this. And interesting. Oh yeah, it's just that the type for some reason is rendered below the function. That just caught me a little bit confused that it uses this elaborate syntax for the return type here. Yeah. So this is one of the few enums that's not generated, and so we can just jump to the source and see what it does here. For the events that are already redacted, it just returns them the way they are. So yeah, I think we no longer generate any enums that where we know that everything is redacted, so this whole thing I think can be deleted. But I'm a little bit confused that we have like so much code here that only applies to redacted events. Content accessors. Why would they only exist on redacted events? Oh, they're only on non-redacted events. That makes sense. So this is just unconditional now, and I should probably move all of this stuff up until the final expression out of that block, and then that block can just... Does the assist work here? No. I think there's actually a assist in Rust Analyzer called unwrap block that should be able to do the equivalent of removing the curly braces and reformatting. But I guess I'll click around with the mouse. Okay, is redacted, doesn't apply anymore. That can go away, and no, I don't want the extra curly braces here either. Yeah. Okay, 6 errors to go. Interesting, where are we? This is the serialize implementation for event types. So what I didn't go into yet is that there is another derive macro. I showed event content, but there's also an event derive which uses this event content trait to pull out the type of content that we're dealing with and serialize that under the type key, because we don't really want to implement the serialization and also deserialization manually for each one of those event types, because there's a bunch. As you can see by me just scrolling over it, or I guess we have the enum somewhere as well of the different kinds. I had it before, yeah. It's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 currently. And with stuff like encrypted payload events, which have their own few extra fields and stuff like that, I could see there being new even more in the future. Don't remember off the top of my head why hierarchy space child is a separate one. I see. Okay, here the docs say it's like a strip state event with an added origin server timestamp key. Clearly, space hierarchy listing needs its own event type, or kind. This is not a term that the spec defines, by the way. This event kind, it's all a little bit implicit in there. And there's also been some discussion quite a while ago about whether all of these things should really be called events, because really the only thing they all have in common is that you receive them in some form from a sync response, I think, or well, with the space hierarchy thing, even that doesn't hold. Basically they just all have a type and a content. And yeah, everything else about them is different. Some people think that only like message like and state events should really be called events, because yeah, they are what forms the graph of that makes up rooms. I had a work in progress PR recently that actually removed the event suffix from these account data objects, but I basically split the whole macro world here in two doing that, and then found that it's not worth it for that, and it created a bunch of duplicated code. Anyways, 6 errors left. Looks like this can just go, which is a little bit worrying, but I'm gonna think about that later. Okay, expand redact event for the event derive. I guess, oh yeah, this, I think this is one that actually needs to stay pretty much the same. But since we don't have the toRedacted thing anymore, I'm gonna need to basically inline that. So the variation in to event ident, I think just goes before, yeah, before the kind. So this is equivalent to format ident redacted something, and then this. Oh, it's not because it could be redacted or potentially sync redacted. Qualify, import, yeah, import. So, or is this actually still relevant? So, let me go to Submodule again. I think, yeah, power levels should be fine. We have a redact event implementation, so for, I guess, yeah, for these two at the very least, for room power levels event and for sync room power levels event, there should be a redact implementation, if I got that right. It doesn't show up here because type aliases in general, even if you use them as the target of a trait implementation, never list that kind of stuff. Or if you just create an impl my generic type, or rather if you have type foo equals my generic type bar, and then you do an impl foo, then actually the methods that you define in this impl unfortunately only show up in the documentation for the generic type rather than in the type alias documentation. Just how Rust doc works, I guess. Now, yeah, here, redact. Okay, so there's only a generic redact implementation for sync state event. Oh, but of course, yeah, this is for the generic type. This isn't the event content derive for a specific event type, but rather for, it does all of this generic stuff that is in here. Okay, but then still we need to distinguish between the sync variant here and the non-sync one, because the macro has to work for both sync state event and just state event. Otherwise we would be generating a sync this is actually exactly the implementation, trait implementation that would be causing issues if I were to leave it at this, because it would put in redacted state event instead of redacted sync state event here, and that's wrong. So I guess I can just do the very basic kind.isSync, then sync else empty string as a second, as another parameter here, but it's not happy. Expected token tree. That's not a very helpful error. I'll extract it out and see whether that makes it happier. Oh, no. I know what I did wrong. I'm missing if. But there is no sync. Is sync? Oh, because it's a variation thing that I need to be checking, not the kind. Yeah, and is sync now is pretty basic check, but we still have it and it looks nice here. And that fixes the last error here in that file. Okay, this looks pretty easy. And now the only complaint Rust has about my macro code is some unused stuff. Nice. But not a valid Ruma event struct identifier. Oh, yeah, okay. That makes sense. It might be that the variations we care for in the event derive shouldn't really change, and it's it really should only be different for the enum macro. So how much of a change was it here? Just a little bit of deleted stuff that, oh yeah, and it includes that where I was a little bit skeptical about just removing it. That is pretty clear then. So there is a little bit of shared stuff between the different macros in this event parse file. I guess the easiest way out of this right now is to actually just copy paste this to the individual files and then have one definition with the redacted variants in and one without. So event kind variation. A lot of this file is about that. And actually there's some, maybe this module actually needs to go away entirely. For the event kind, you can see here there is actually some code that also doesn't make sense because of basically the same reason, because it's only used in one of the macros and not the other, and only one of those macros then uses this implementation, and because of that this is just unreachable, and I didn't want to put in something here that really should never be used. So how am I gonna do this? I guess this is even used in all three, but I'm not sure. Like, yeah, this is used in event enum, event content, and event. Doesn't make it any easier. So I guess I'm gonna go over the content changes and think about those for a moment. So that's only this. Yeah, I don't know yet what is going to apply here, whether we need the 6 variant event kind variation or the 4 variant one. I guess I'm going to stash the changes from this file and assume it's the 6 variant one for now, which means the 4 variant one is only going to be used for the enum macro, and then I can copy what I now have the stripped down the stripped down enum type into event enum and revert all of the other changes. And there's some utility changes here as well. I guess I should check where these things are actually used. That's for the enum, okay. If it's just for the enum, I think I should move it before doing anything else, so we don't get that stuff confused. Cannot find. I'm pretty sure that's now unused, yeah, because it was only for this, and then it can just be private to this file as well. Okay, and this one is actually used in multiple places. So I'm gonna leave that and comment just this part. Yeah, now Git complains again and keeps the stuff that I don't care about. Okay, back to previous state basically. And I wanted to stash the changes from here, and the ones in this file I think I can just revert entirely. I'm pretty sure they don't actually make sense. And the utility changes probably don't make sense, but I'm gonna stash them for now. And there's some syntax to actually do this based on, yeah. Oh yeah, it's not git stash save, but git stash push. Prints Ruma macros, source events. So utils is one, content is one I want to dash away, and the enum changes I actually want to copy over to a new, oh no, that's the wrong thing, but this I actually want in some capacity, so I'm gonna leave it in. And yeah, now there's only these changes in the local working directory. And so I guess what I can do is under the event enum, module, create a submodule with all of this stuff, and then revert the changes to the file that's used by the other macros. Let Rust analyze it, create the declaration for the module somewhere in the parent module. It's a little bit weird that it puts it over the imports. Pretty unusual style, as far as my experience goes. So now it's just a matter of changing this to a self-import. And then the enum macro is going to be the only thing that uses the 4 variant event kind variation type. Everything else uses the 6 variant one, and I guess we also have our own event kind in here now, but we don't want that, so at least I don't think so right now. That should be a separate refactoring if it makes sense at all. Oh, but this is interesting. If I do it like this, it's going to complain that I am redefining all of these definitions. So I guess I'll keep them but comment them out for now. This can definitely go. And these event enum things, that's another interesting one. They are shared between event enum and event type modules, so also doesn't make a lot of sense to duplicate them. Gonna remove them here and make sure that we update the imports in the parent module, and then things should be interoperable again, basically, between these two modules, and the one error in here I'm pretty sure should go away. Is there a difference between? Oh yeah, there is a difference. Event parse. Okay, close. Getting closer. So I think this was one, yeah, that's used in 2 different places. So for now I'm just gonna copy paste to somewhere in here and use the other event kind variation type. Yeah, now we got mismatched types in a bunch of places. I think this can be the most reasonable way to fix this, and I should also rename this file. Is to provide a conversion function from this 4 variant type to the 6 variant type. and then wherever this type error happens, just call dot into. Ah, okay, yeah. I guess it should work this way, although it is going to lead to that function getting used when it otherwise might not be, but that seems like a very small issue. And then we actually get some dead code here, which I expected. And it's this and is sync that I can just go away. By the way, I don't intend to really leave this module in permanently, but it seemed like a good way to explore what things are going to, how things are going to work after the refactoring is done. Just one more warning: to sync is not used. Yeah, maybe it ultimately makes sense to have separate types here, but I don't think I want them to be named the same thing permanently, which is just going to lead to confusion. So I definitely wonder, I think to full was called from the enum module. Yeah, so it's only called from one place, but it's not the enum module, so I was wrong about that. Oh yeah, of course. I'm no longer calling how do I find this? Some function call dot into. That's a little bit too free form, I guess. But I know that the variables are always called var. So using a regex search, yeah, that's the two calls I was thinking might be a little bit redundant. So we now have two functions called to full that both do the same thing, really, in the new module and in the previous one. And there's also to sync. I'm just gonna leave a comment. And also, I'm going to take a short break and be back in a few minutes. And I'm back. And there's a lot of errors. Okay, a bunch of mismatched types. And also, yeah, okay. And also a few that aren't in the event enum. Macro invocation. And I think most of these can also be deleted. Any room event is an interesting one. I don't think I need to change anything other than delete the two redacted variants here for the refactoring that I want to definitely do. There's also I've been considering, but I'm not certain really whether it makes sense to basically flatten these two enums into any room event. So instead of first matching on the event kind, you would match on the type inside directly. So basically if this enum has 20 variants and this one has another 30, then this would be a 50 variant enum. But yeah, not something that needs to be decided today, and I'm actually leaning towards not doing that. So same thing here. This is simplified. This goes away entirely. And yeah, this is one of the Redact implementations that's just going to return the self type now. It should look something like this. That enum no longer exists, so the impl goes away. This type can go away. Redacted. Yeah, so anywhere there's any redacted, it can just be deleted, but looks like this was everything as far as the non-macro errors go, but no. Oh yeah, of course, so I don't need any of this anymore, basically. Or, well, I still need to... Is the state key relevant? Oh yeah, okay, this is deciding whether to deserialize a given event as a message-like event or a state event. And this is actually very important to do this, to do it in this way by checking for whether there is a state key, because you can submit events with an arbitrary type to the home server, and if you were to interpret an event based on its type only, then you would get some stuff wrong. For example, I'm not entirely sure how this is enforced on home servers, but you might be able to send a power levels event that's not really a power levels event because it doesn't have a state key and so is a message-like event. And even if it was enforced, you still shouldn't rely on it. That's not possible. Because when computing the actual power levels, only an actual state event is going to have meaning and not a message-like event that happens to have the same type, basically. But yeah, this deserialization helper no longer needs the unsigned field as far as I can tell, so this should be a matter of removing this whole match here and here too. I think there was another usage of, yeah, down here, same thing. I wonder whether this type is still used anywhere. Okay, not sure what that's about entirely, but the import can definitely go. And we're back to almost 100 errors in the event enum invocation, but nothing else. So I think a good next step is going to be to comment out some of the generated code that's not that important. For example, these Redact implementations should be maybe even a majority of the errors. And not super critical. Oh yeah. That's all of the errors from the macro. So commenting out these two Redact implementations for the other enums, it looks like this compiles. Oh, but there are tests for redactions. Oops. I think I can put a CFG false or something in here to just silence that, basically. So now I have, yeah, pretty much just removed all of the redaction and redacted events logic or enum variants from the enum generation code. Of course, that wasn't the original goal. The original goal was to go from event enum, where you can match on redacted or full, to then match on specific event types, to basically the opposite. Match the specific event type first, and then whether it's full or redacted. But it's good to see that this seems to be working. So basically this step is still missing, but I have removed it from that other place. And I'm not going to stream too much longer, so if some of this has confused you, or you have some related or not super related questions, I think this would be a good time to ask them. Because I think this is actually a good format for also like explaining parts of the code when you can directly see what I'm seeing. But if not, then I'm going to have a quick look again at what's still left to do, create a work in progress comment and upload that. Yeah, so I think CI mostly fails here because there are unused things in the code. Although this is very weird. Oh, no, it's not. I think this is, yeah, this is code that should be failing, but the test doesn't fail because the individual macro invocations are failing. They should be. The test fails because the actual compiler output includes extra stuff about functions being unused that isn't expected. Oh, and since this now builds, I should be able to document the main crate the way it exists now. I think all features should work. Oh, and I shouldn't pass -- open, or maybe I should, and I can still copy paste the link over to my streaming Firefox instance if it opens up in another one. I actually have 3 Firefox profiles. Yeah, 3 separate Firefox processed trees or whatever you would call it open right now. My primary one, my video one where I also have the stream open to see a Twitch chat, because all of the bridging or whatever solutions I've tried or connecting to it with an IRC client are kind of brittle. Plus this one that I use for streaming. Okay. That worked, and it didn't open in this Firefox instance. It opened in the primary one. So I'll copy it over, and let's see, events. It looks a little bit different than on the other docs page because I didn't pass all of the unstable features that enable rendering of features and stuff like that. But it should be the case that there are fewer things in here now. Yes, certainly. And this is now kind of easier to grok, I hope. But I wonder whether this should render like that. It's a little bit unexpected that it would render the generic type with the content type filled in rather than saying policy rule room event without the content here, which is the same thing, just as a type alias. I thought I made the macros output type aliases as part of this, but either that's not the case or Rust doc has decided for some reason to resolve the type alias before rendering the variants here. Okay, yeah, but that's what needs to change now. In these enums, like any state event, we actually need something else than just state event, policy rule, room event content. Well, I need a better I need a different variant to talk about because that one just has a too much of a complicated name. So I think what we want is just to replace this part with a type that I don't know what to call it. Maybe state event should be changed to an enum over what we currently have here under a different name. So this could be renamed full state event, and then we have a state event enum that contains either full state event or redacted state event, or the other option is to create the enum, leave this one as is, and give the enum some name, but the possibly redacted prefix is definitely too long, I think. So maybe full as a prefix for non-redacted events makes sense. And yeah, then there's going to be a little bit of deserialization magic to make sure when deserializing one of those possibly redacted events that the right thing happens, which is that code that I removed from here, I think. Oh no, that's inside the macros. Other enum file. Yeah, with looking at unsigned. I think this should be a reliable way to tell whether an event is redacted. Otherwise, the only possibility would be to basically declare an event to be redacted if you fail to find the mandatory fields in its content object, which would be pretty suboptimal, I would say. Yeah, this has worked fine so far, but also I don't think that many people have even tried to work with redacted events with Ruma or the Matrix Rust SDK, so maybe we will discover some annoying issues with that. I hope not. Yeah, but I saw that Isaiah wrote something in the live streams chat. Hard to track the hierarchy of the different types. Yes, absolutely. Putting the redacted flag on the actual event makes it easier to grok. Yeah, I really hope so. And it, as I was saying in the beginning, I'm not sure whether you were watching yet. I think it shouldn't just make it easier to grok, but also easier to do the right thing. For example, when you receive a redacted room topic state event, that you actually notice that and update the room name to, yeah, I don't know entirely what the default name is for rooms that are not DMs, but in the DM case it should, I think, revert back to showing the names of other people in the room with you as the room name, which I don't think is possible without redactions once you have set a room name for a DM to revert back to the default naming for DMs. And of course, you would want to support that in a client in some way. Yeah. Not sure whether Element actually allows you to specifically unset the room topic rather than set it to an empty string and have it show up empty for everyone. I guess you might have to track down the room topic change or post a new one and in the timeline redact that. Maybe that works. I haven't tried yet, and it's been a while that I've had a DM room that accidentally had a title, and so yeah, it would show up as the name of one member for everyone, or including that person themselves. Anyways, enough rambling. Gonna end the stream here, and yeah, if you want to see where this is all going to go, subscribe to this issue. Probably going to open a draft pull request in a few minutes, and then iterate on it from there and implement the remaining changes. Bye!